Welcome back to another episode of the Water Matters podcast. So I am pleased to be joined today by Catherine. Catherine works on our team here at Graph UK and our marketing team. And Catherine and I are going to have a conversation about water matters in general. This is episode 2. So hopefully you've listened to episode 1 of the podcast. If you haven't, I would highly encourage you to do so. Episode 1 was our introduction to this whole thing. I was joined by Tim Smedley, who is the author of The Last Drop. And Tim, as I said on that episode, and I've said in a few other videos and emails, Tim is like our most qualified of contributors. No disrespect, Catherine, at all. But Tim has written this book on the world's water crisis, and Tim is therefore, he studied this subject for several years. He then wrote several 100,000 words about it, and so is able to just sort of share story after story, which really helps educate people on the world's water crisis and what we might be able to do about it. So would highly recommend, please, if you haven't listened to episode 1, go and listen to episode 1. But this is episode 2. Is going to be Catherine and I talking about what is Water Matters in general, why are we doing it, what's the goal, why should you care? So Catherine's got a few questions that we're just going to talk through to hopefully really get across the point as to what we're trying to achieve with Water Matters and why it's relevant to anyone listening or reading the content that we're sharing. So, Catherine, how are you?
Yeah, I'm good, thank you. I'm really excited to be here. It's it's a bit out of my comfort zone, but I'm all for it.
Good.
So I haven't really been involved that much in the podcast leading up to it happening. So it's probably great that I don't really know much about it. So to start off, what is Water Matters? What is it all about?
Good question. So really it is. So it's both a digital newsletter, which is going to be shared fortnightly, and a podcast, which is also a new episode will be released fortnightly. So a long time ago within our business at Graph UK, we used to issue a monthly newsletter. It was a printed newsletter at the time called Water Matters. And it was a selection of case studies, stories. It was news and events about what was going on in our business that helped us just as a sort of overview of what is happening in the world of water management, but very specifically in the world of Graph at the time. We shared this, sent it out monthly to all of our customers and database of subscribers and all that sort of thing. That was sort of a casualty of the pandemic. We stopped doing it at that point. And so been thinking about bringing it back for a little while, but wanted to change it, wanted to make it much less about Graph as a business and much less about our team, much less of an internal sort of publication, and make it more useful to anyone interested in the subject of sustainable water management. And it was really after reading Tim's book, The Last Drop, and then just being inspired really in terms of spreading the sort of, raising the subject of water management, bringing it to the surface more, because even in our day-to-day business, not enough people talk about the challenges that we face. Water is still, certainly in the UK, incredibly cheap and just taken for granted. And as Tim and I talked about on the last episode, and I'm sure will be a recurring theme on future episodes, it's a problem that's getting worse. It's a crisis that is sort of waiting to happen. And so, the idea was, let's bring it back in a few different forms. So we've got the written email newsletter that people can just simply subscribe to and read to stay up to date with what's happening. And then we've got this podcast, which will be sharing a new episode every 2 weeks, which will be a mixture of us talking to people within the industry, people like Tim that have a lot of stories to share about the water sort of situation, both in the UK and in other areas around the world. And our goal is really a 3-step process. So we want really, step 1 is for people to start listening and talking. Just listening, reading, kind of educating themselves about what is the situation with water management, firstly in the UK, but also kind of more globally. Step 2 would then be to start talking to other people about it. So to make sure that people are discussing the challenge, discussing the issues, and the real sort of real-time, real-life scenarios, so that people are thinking about it and talking about it amongst themselves. And then step 3 would be to turn that talking into action. So we're very fortunate. We deal with a lot of customers who take some ownership of their own water use, people that install water butts, people that install rainwater harvesting systems, people that design and install and manage surface water attenuation tanks, as well as sewage treatment as well. So people that are actually kind of walking the talk, if you like, making changes in their own life to help with the water situation, which ultimately is what we all need to do if we're going to be, if we're going to kind of find our way to a better place in the future, whereby we either don't run out or it doesn't, we need to somehow sort of, it's only through behavioral change and sort of better management of water that we will prevent a kind of water crisis in however long's time. It's all, anything could happen, but as Tim talked about last episode, it's been, one group have kind of statistically proven that within 10 years we will have a water shortage if we don't change behavior now. And so let's start going through those 3 steps and sort of using that approach to help us not get to that point as the goal.
Cool. So why really do you think people should care about it? I think it's a bit tricky, especially being in the UK where it's currently throwing it down with rain right now. And people look out their windows and they're a bit like, what are you talking about? There's no water scarcity. Look at it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one very interesting thing about this, and we've already had it a couple of times now as we record these episodes, is we're always referring to what the weather is doing real time. So, and it's already been a mixture because, to your point, yes, it's raining now. I think episode 1, it was absolutely throwing it down. But at times, and something we recorded the other day, lovely sunny day. I think we have both a water scarcity issue and an issue of flooding and just too much rainwater, and so the reality is it's an issue of both sides of that same coin. So we'll talk about both parts of it because there is, both are very, very relevant. If you haven't got enough water, or we get to what Tim described as day 0 on the first episode, which is when cities and then, large kind of, towns, cities literally run out of water, and you go to turn the tap on and there's just none there. And there'll be standpipes on the corner of the streets and all that sort of stuff, and you'll just be allocated a certain amount that you can go and collect and use. That extreme has come close in many places, including London in 2012, which was a bit of a shocking statistic from that Tim shares in his book and also mentioned in the last episode. But you've got that extreme, and then you've got the extremes of flooding and the fact that because storms are getting more extreme, and anyone that's has to deal with the devastation of a flood will know that is just as bad, if not worse than the thought of running out of water. So it really is both those things. Anyone listening that has experienced either one of them would understand why this is such an important topic and subject. And perhaps, this is all part of getting to step 2, where people do talk more about it. There's not many people that share their own experiences of, floods or what they've had to deal with. And so through giving them this kind of platform and us focusing on it, that's the goal really, is to get people to talk about both the not having enough, and what might happen if that becomes the case, certainly in the next 10 years or so, or in dealing with floods and the damage that causes and that sort of stuff, which is also very real for some people. So it's just an important subject to talk about much more.
So it's really actually quite relevant to just everybody. And why do you feel then that people should read the newsletter or listen to the podcast?
It is very relevant to everybody, and especially, anyone with children or grandchildren to think about, because at the moment it is very much taken for granted. No one, or I don't think that many people are that conscious of their use of water. I think perhaps we've all been told enough times now that the majority of people probably turn the tap off when they're cleaning their teeth, for example. One of the most simple things, but I'm sure there will also be plenty of people that don't. And whether you don't or not is not going to affect the money that's in your pocket at the moment, because water is just not that expensive. That will change. It's almost bound to change. But it's very relevant. It's relevant for everyone. I think what we're hoping for by sharing sort of articles, case studies, good examples of where people have really taken ownership of their own water management footprint and that sort of stuff, by sharing that content through the newsletter, and then also having conversations with people who will either be people like Tim, who have just got a wealth of knowledge on the subject, or even some of our customers who just have decided to install a rainwater harvesting system for whatever reason, or other businesses that are promoting the changeover of septic tanks to sewage treatment plants because they appreciate that septic tanks, are not, especially if they're draining into a watercourse, that's not a good, way to manage sewage treatment. And so they also have, stories to tell as to why people should be investing in proper sewage treatment plants and the benefits that has on rivers and watercourses around the country. And so hopefully by sharing those messages and stories and case studies, people will both be they'll learn something, they'll be interested in it, because it really will, matter and will make a difference in the future. And they'll then perhaps also think about what they might be able to do themselves. A lot of people don't even have the simplest form of rainwater harvesting, which is a water butt that just enables them to, collect rainwater from the roof of their house or their garage or their shed or whatever. That then means they can use that rainwater for irrigating their lawn or watering their plants or washing their car, all of which does, maybe on a one-to-one basis, feels like it's a very sort of small, very low, benefit. But actually, if from a collective perspective, the more people do it, if the whole street did it, then actually you might start to affect the way that you might start to reduce the likelihood of flooding in that street, because a 300-litre water butt per house would make a lot of difference, overall. So yeah, hopefully some inspiration to open up the, conversation about it, get some dialogue going amongst people, and then fast forward, hopefully those people start to make positive steps towards their own behavioral management, changing how they use water, to give us then more stories to share and talk about, and the cycle continues.
So what is your overall hope for Water Matters? What do you want it to achieve?
Firstly, really is just to be a good way of getting stories and sort of, share the various sort of bits of information about water, both from a water scarcity perspective all the way through to flooding and just, the storm events that, so both ends of the spectrum, so that people become aware of what is happening, because it is also one of those things that if you're not directly affected, then you're probably not even thinking about it that much. But we need to the goal is to get more people talking about it, because we really do believe that it's only through more conversations, more, it being a bigger part of more people's daily lives, thinking about how they use water, that there might lead to some change in the future. So step one is to, subscribe to the newsletter. So the website is watermatters.life. Just simply, put their email address in there, subscribe. What happens for anyone that does that is they'll receive a welcome email immediately with a video that contains a video just explaining kind of what happens next. So the first 3 days, there's a daily email just to kind of introduce the different parts of Water Matters to each new subscriber. And then they'll fall into a 2 weekly, every other Wednesday will be the latest email that they'll then receive, which will be a mixture of articles. It will be articles about what's happening real time. So if there's kind of water events in the news or things going on that are relevant, then that'll be shared. It's also, we've got a selection of guest authors who are contributing to this, Tim being one of them. So they'll be sharing stories about things that they're aware of or research that they've done on the subject of water management, as well as case studies from our own customers, what's happening, real life sort of scenarios and examples of sustainable water management, what good things are happening out there. And then in addition to that, as we said earlier, the podcast episode will be kind of linked with the fortnightly newsletter. So sometimes it will be a discussion with the same author that shared an article in the previous newsletter. Sometimes it will just be a conversation that we're having here around one of the topics that we've written about. But really the goal is just to share more, to first of all inspire people to think more about their own behavior in relation to water management, then to share it with other people, to discuss it with friends, family, that sort of stuff, make sure that other people are aware of it, and then, as I say, hopefully, further down the line, turn that talking into action, and as a minimum, start saving water somehow, a water butt, or just recycling water within the home, that sort of stuff.
And can people find the link to the podcast in the same place?
Yes, so there's the second or third email that comes through for new subscribers introduces the podcast. The podcast at this point is able to be found on most, if not all, of the sort of typical podcast platforms. It's also on a YouTube channel, so Water Matters on YouTube. So yeah, it'll also be linked. So anyone that has subscribed to the newsletter, there will always be a reminder and a link to the latest podcast episode within the email newsletter. And of course, we've got all the normal social media pages, so can be found on Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, all the rest of them. So should be easy for people to find.
Brilliant. I think that was all of the questions.
Make sense? Yeah,
I'm gonna have to go and have a listen now, because I have to admit I haven't listened to the whole of the first episode.
No, that's good. It's only recently happened and been shared. So I think if I could just encourage any listeners to do what we've talked about, go to watermatters.life, enter your email address, subscribe, go through the email sequence. It's a small group of us at the moment, but it's only going to grow through people reading, and then if interested and hopefully enjoying the content, then share it with other people. Subscribe to the podcast as well, and listen and comment and sort of join the conversation if you like. That's the goal. And so we will be continuing to share all sorts of stories and case studies about sustainable water management, and hopefully get to the point where some of the listeners join us on the podcast and get involved as well, tell their own stories about what they're doing to inspire others to do the same, and to remember that water certainly matters now, it matters more in the future. And so hopefully it's been interesting and helpful for you to learn a little bit more about what Water Matters is all about. And please do subscribe to the podcast and share it with other people. And we look forward to sharing more episodes in the future.